As climate urgency grows, so too does the need to do something better for the planet. And that's why I'm here today to chat with Ankit Todi, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Mahindra Group, to understand how they are balancing their ambition with the need to create sustainable solutions that can create inclusive, truly planet-positive solutions. So let's get into conversation with today's episode of Leaders in Focus. Hello viewers, welcome to another episode of Leaders in Focus. With me today is Ankit Todi, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Mahindra Group. Mr. Todi, thank you for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right into it. We've seen in recent years that there have been some short-term economic pressures that have gone up against climate goals and the achievement of them. As the custodian of sustainability at the Mahindra Group, how do you ensure that the sustainability mission stays true to its course while trying to accelerate growth across the sectors?
So I think it's extremely important to acknowledge the fact that climate outcomes and environment accretive outcomes can go hand in hand with economically accretive outcomes.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an understanding that not enough people acknowledge. So when you talk from any climate action, you can divide those into three broad buckets. The first bucket is where the business case, the economic business case is very clear. So one of the biggest areas of action is renewable energy. Today, renewable energy is extremely economically viable. You will actually save significant amount of money. Another big area of action is energy efficiency. Again, it's a clear win-win both for environmental outcomes as well as for economic outcomes. Absolutely. And similarly, there are a number of other areas of action where these go hand in hand together. So you also have a second bucket of activities which I say are often driven by regulatory action. So let's say if you were to take care of hazardous waste. Now hazardous waste, it's relatively harder to make a business case or how do you recover value by disposing waste properly. So in those areas, it's the regulatory action that determines that you have to do it, and that's what determines the business case that any good company, whether it's in the public space or non-public space, would want to be compliant, and hence you do that. And then I would also acknowledge that there's definitely a bucket of activities where it's not well established yet, and the reason for that often is because some of the negative impacts are currently an externality to the business. You don't account for the negative externality. Absolutely. But as the ecosystem is evolving, as people develop a deeper understanding of these subjects, a lot of them will also start becoming economically viable. But there's enough to do where you don't have to compromise on economic outcomes, and I believe that's the main takeaway.
So you talked a bit about regulatory pressures, externalities such as that. And of course, Mahindra has this global profile, and I'm sure that there are many external pressures across environments, such as regulatory environments. How do you adapt to those demands while staying true to the planet positive mission of the group?
Let me start by very briefly talking about what do we mean by the planet positive approach. So as a group, what we are trying to say is that for all of our group companies, we will try to build planet positive businesses. Now, what does that mean? The first part of it is to look at all the direct environmental implications that you have. So specifically with respect to direct emissions, with respect to water uses, with respect to waste generation, with respect to material use.
Right.
And now in each of these areas, as a group, we have commitments to become carbon neutral on emission, get to 100% renewable energy or as close to 100%, making sure that we are water positive as a group, which is we consume and restore more water than what we use. Look at waste management scientifically, making sure that we don't send waste to landfills, but rather figure a way to either first reduce it, process it, and then hopefully recycle it. And then similarly look at material use. How do you use low emission material? How do you use recycled material, recyclable material, all of those kind of things. But broadly speaking, everything that is directly in your operational control of operations, especially in manufacturing, real estate, those kind of sectors. And then the second area of action is what we say, how do you look at building a greener portfolio of businesses and how do you take the ecosystem along? So a very classic example from a Mahindra context is EVs. Now EVs are environmentally friendly. If I look at a different sector, in the real estate we are doing net zero buildings, which is again more environment friendly, construction. In the holidays and resort space, we are looking at net zero resorts. How do you offer sustainable holidays? Similarly, we have a big renewable energy play, which again is a green business in a lot of ways. So what can you do to build businesses which are green in nature? Similarly, in a lot of areas, it's not just what you do inside the company, but what you do in the ecosystem. A lot of our environmental footprint actually sits in the supply chain for a number of industries. So working closely with the supply chain also becomes very important. Lastly, I think I'll address the sort of the investor side of the question.
Right.
I think there is enough and more support where especially the mature long-term investor cares about this subject. So the frequency of conversations and the depth of engagement, both on topics like ESG ratings, but specifically if I talk about climate related action, the depth and frequency of these conversations are constantly increasing, and government support is also very strong. So at least in the Indian context, again, there is a number of climate policies which are coming up, in fact at very high frequency I would say, which will impact a lot of sectors, how they are reacting to it. So generally speaking, there's a lot of support for more action in this ecosystem.
So closer to home, being here in Mumbai as we are, we've seen the unseasonably early onset of the monsoons, we've seen extreme heat waves, we've seen snowfall that's been quite out of the norm. So how does the group as this titan of industry help accelerate the adoption of climate tech and transition to this just low carbon inclusive growth model?
I'll address that question by talking about, let's say, another lens to look at all of climate action across industries from either a mitigation action, where we are trying to reduce impact, and the other is adaptive action, where we are trying to live with what the impact is going to come. So when I talk about electricity, we are used to taking electricity from the grid. But if you were to shift to renewable energy, you will have to do things a bit differently. It's not as simple as getting it from the grid. Now, in that journey, there is both a number of, let's say, large well-established players who will support you in that transition, but in a lot of cases you also need new innovative solutions. So let's say renewable as an area is a bit more mature, but if I were to go to energy efficiency, that is not a one size or one solution that fits everything. You have a huge number of solutions that will have to be deployed in different use cases, and that is where the role of innovation in climate tech startups etc. come into play. That how do you work with new technology, how do you give a chance for these pilot technologies to work out, and we have been doing that in bits and pieces in different parts of our ecosystem, both for energy related areas but also areas like waste, which are completely new industries altogether. Now if I were to jump very quickly to the other side, which is from an adaptation lens. Now adaptation lens again becomes slightly more critical for certain industries, one of them being agriculture. So generally speaking, with the kind of changes that you're talking about, especially heat is a major issue. So heat has a relatively significant impact on crop productivity. So you would see in the current Bombay context, mango prices are going up, coffee prices in last
even
few
vegetables
years,
for that matter in the past few
everything
months.
In a way, everything, but some commercial crops you are able to see the impact a bit more easily. So coffee prices have been up like crazy. Lots of food commodity prices have been going up like crazy. I personally belong to Assam. I was born and brought up there. Tea industry has been impacted significantly. So what you see is that these sectors like agriculture, generally speaking, is going to be the one that is going to be a bit more impacted. So what kind of actions you can take to, one, again build awareness, and two, sort of promote solutions which will help you help not you as in the farming ecosystem to be able to be more resilient or adapt to these kind of changes. So to give an example, drip irrigation is one of the effective solutions which solves for water efficiency in the irrigation in the agriculture ecosystem. So we have a company that does that. We have a couple of companies that are also doing climate resilient varieties of seeds. The government is also very supportive of this agenda because it also solves for food inflation. So the related point I am also making here is that government's interests are very much aligned with commercial interests.
Climate change is a very real and present danger, something that we've seen denied in some circles, decried in others. Some choose to stay the path. But leaving all of that conjecture aside, how do you as a premier figurehead at the Mahindra Group, dovetail with premier institutions such as COP, such as the World Economic Forum, such as the UN, to shape policy and to create impact that can move across generations?
Absolutely. So the way I look at the policy conversation is that there are two levels of engagement. One is at the domestic level in terms of, as a country we have some significant climate commitments. We want to get to net zero. We want to make sure that our grid is decarbonized. There is a certain amount of renewable energy, and a number of supporting policies are happening in that direction. So if I were to just look at a relatively last 12 to 18 month lens, there are broadly these 4 buckets of policies. There is policies related to disclosures, so BRSR, ESG related disclosures that helps you set up the data foundation, what corporations are doing.
Okay.
Then there have been a number of policies, especially in the extended producer responsibility or waste management space. So we now have, as a country, relatively more clear policies on how do you manage plastic waste, how do you manage e-waste, how do you manage battery waste, used oil, tires, end-of-life vehicles, and the list is only growing with time. And each of them have their own nuances in terms of how will that industry function, what are the implications for different companies. A third category of regulations which are more recent in nature are to do with things like emission intensity reduction. So a few sectors, especially in cement, steel, a few other hard to abate sectors, there are targets around intensity reduction, that how do you continue to produce the same quantity of material but reduce the amount of emissions associated with that. So one part of this conversation is making sure that these policies are pragmatic in nature. It's not something which is
rooted in reality.
It's rooted in reality, absolutely. So how do you make sure that none of these transitions can happen overnight? There will be a gradual path where the ecosystem will have to be built and developed, and then only will action hopefully 100%. Accelerate over a period of time. So I think that's one level of engagement, that how do you ensure that we don't bring policy just based on what the global ecosystem is talking about, but make policies which keep India's economic interests in mind, but at the same time also solve for decarbonization, also solve for environmental outcomes depending on the nature and state of the industry. That's one. The second is that now you as a country are also part of the global ecosystem, and climate is one of those few topics where the level of global engagement is very high, sort of making sure that you are able to bring the message that as a country you understand your responsibility, especially as a growing country, because unlike a lot of the other parts of the Western world where there is relative economic stagnation or there is not a lot of volume growth, and hence it's much easier for them to think about decarbonization of their economy in absolute terms, but India and the developed countries in general are still growing economically. So the context of how we decarbonize in our pathway is going to be a bit different. So making sure that we are participating actively in that conversation to represent the India viewpoint. Climate is one of those topics where we really need to move away from a thinking of it being competitive to one being about collaboration. Only then will we be able to make progress as a society.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, just to round things off, Ankit, looking back on your career until now, was there maybe, since you mentioned learning, it popped into my head, any major learning or maybe something you've unlearned over the course of your career that's probably sticking out of in your mind?
No, I think the one learning for me overall is that you have to be multilingual when you are working in the climate ecosystem, because climate is not a subject, or generally ESG climate is not a subject that you can do in isolation. So most of the actions have to be done and supported with a wide variety of stakeholders. So right from investor, understanding what they want, how do you engage with them, to let's say at the leadership level working with different business heads, right from let's say the procurement function to the marketing function to the sales team, function by function everyone has a role. Manufacturing particularly has a role. So I think that's the main learning, that how do you engage with different sets of people within an organization and also across industry in the value chain, and are able to keep that conversation going in a language and form that is mutually beneficial, and people are able to see both why is it important for them to play a role and what is the role that they play.
Ankit, thank you so much for chatting with us today. It was lovely having you with us.
Thank you so much.
With a clear focus on impact and innovation, leaders such as Ankit Todi are helping us understand how to deal with today's climate realities. And that kind of leadership is essential in a world such as ours, which is increasingly interconnected and where we're looking to drive meaningful progress. Thank you for watching this episode of Leaders in Focus. I'll see you in the next one.